All right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode, of course, is a topic that everybody is very, very curious about. And it's a topic that I've made videos about before, but I've made them a long time ago or I've made them in increments. So they're not really all together. And my Korean language learning journey is not necessarily concise. So in this video, I'm going to tell you about how I learned Korean. Now, I have my coffee first of all. If you want to make some coffee and then watch the episode, pause real quick, make some coffee, and then sit back and relax and enjoy. But there's two things I kind of want to say before I start this episode, and I got an itchy eye, and it's this: how I learned Korean does not matter. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. A lot of people, especially people who first come across my channel, and especially on YouTube, when people are trying to understand how to learn foreign languages, one of the things that everyone always wants to know is, how did that person learn this language? How did they get so good? I should follow what they're doing. No, you shouldn't. Just follow the science. No matter what I did, no matter how I learned, I'm just one case I'm one success story. I'm one case study in a pool of many, right? 8 billion people learned languages the same way I learned Korean, through constant exposure and through interesting exposure. I'll explain that in a second, but the science stays the same. So I've learned Korean now for about 8 years and 8 months, almost 9 years, right? And I got to a pretty good speaking level in around 3 or 4 or 5 years. But so when you hear me explain certain things, you're going to say, wait a minute. Oh, John studied. John used a translator. I could do that too. No. In all experiences, there's trial and error, right? Trial and error. So just because someone did something doesn't mean that it's okay to do it. And on the opposite end, just because someone didn't do something doesn't mean that you can't do it. So here's a great expression: take this episode with a grain of salt. Don't try to mirror yourself based on what I did with Korean, in the sense that you don't want to just look at John did just this, so I have to do just that. Because first of all, you're probably not going to be able to match the amount of time I was able to put in the span that I did it in. I put a lot of time in a short time period, right? So a lot of the things that I've tried, I got lucky because I was in such a good situation in terms of time. I had a lot of time to spend. So just to kind of give a quick summary of how people learn languages, there's only one way we learn languages, right? You can look at Stephen Krashen's work, you can look at the language acquisition theory, all that. There's only one way we learn languages, and that's when we understand messages, right? When we understand something, that's when the language itself goes into our subconscious. And that's how we develop a language ability. But hearing this, a lot of people go, oh, so then I just got to find stuff that I can understand. No, you have to find stuff that you're interested in. Because if you're interested in something, you'll pay attention. And if you pay attention, then naturally you'll learn the language, right? You'll start to understand because you need the attention to focus on what's going on. People often try to, make the language work for them. Like, oh, this is a second grade level. No, it doesn't work like that. Interest, whether it's a person in front of you, a native speaker in front of you, whether it's digital content like Netflix, whether it's a podcast like this. The important thing is you have to have real, natural language exposure and lots of it. That's the most effective way to get to a native level quick, right? Just spend so much time with the language. But the caveat is that it has to be interesting. If you're not interested, you won't pay attention. If you don't pay attention, it's not going in your head. So how I always say to everybody, just to summarize how you learn language learning, how you get good at a language fast and effectively, and it seems to be the most effective way. You watch a lot, you listen a lot, And then, in my opinion, and then once you have a good ability in the language, you read a lot. And that's it. It's through input. It's all through input. Let me get closer in frame here. So I'm going to tell you my experiences, and then you can use my experience as a way to sort of test out things that you think you might want to try, but within this framework, right? You got to watch natives, whether it's digitally or in real life, doesn't matter. And you have to listen to a lot. So watch and listen at the beginner level. Then when you get good at the language, once you can understand lots of stuff, once you get to a first grade, a second grade level in English or in any other language that you're learning, like a first grader, like native, right? Then start to read, and reading will be the next thing that brings you up to a really, really high level. But that's it. It's that simple. Watch a lot, listen a lot, and then later on, read a lot. Okay? So here's my journey. Okay. So basically, I'll tell you why I started learning Korean. In college, in my 3.5 year, basically I was living with a bunch of friends, and all my friends are very creative types, right? They make music, they produce, they sing, they rap. They're all into music. Everyone. I live with 6 guys, and I lived with 5 guys, and I was one. But all of them are like really creative people. They like making music all the time. And I love music. I like making music too, but it's not something that I wanted to do as as I saw it, like that was going to be like their career. But for me, I was just enjoying it. Right. But I didn't have something cool. That I was like my thing. Right. I didn't have a thing. And I was just partying and hanging out, college. I was never a student who enjoyed studying. I just like hanging out with people. I talk a lot. I just like hanging out with people, not really studious. I didn't like school in general. I was like, whatever. But hanging out with people is fun. But I didn't have a thing, right? And so at some point, I don't know, I kind of feel like I wanted, I want to look cool or something, right? And a lot of people, I forget why. I forget how it happened. But I was just like, oh yeah, learning a foreign language would be really cool. And this is my 3rd year in college, third and a half year in college, year 3. And so I was like, oh, that'd be really cool. And part of my lineage, my heritage is Mexican and Panamanian. So I have Latin blood in me. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool to learn Spanish. Growing up in New York, all my friends speak Spanish. If you go to my friend's house, their moms are speaking Spanish all the time. It's a language that I was familiar with. And if you live in New York, you grow up hearing a lot of Spanish, so you already know a lot of the sounds. Kind of similar to how Koreans who are interested in Japanese culture will hear a lot of Japanese growing up just through the TV. So you're already, I was already kind of adjusted to the sounds of Spanish. I could mimic Spanish speakers, you do the Spanish accent. I was it was a familiar enough language. So I was like, man, I should really learn a foreign language and get good. That'd be cool. Because I had nothing to do. I was bored. And so I took I took a semester off of school, and I went to Ecuador. And so I went to Ecuador, and in Ecuador, I lived there for 3 months with native speakers. And we would work together doing volunteer work in the Amazon jungle for that was for the first month or whatever. But we were it was me and some other volunteers who were there with native speakers speaking Spanish. And I got pretty good at Spanish pretty quickly because I said, one, I had already been used to the sounds ever since I was a little kid. If you grow up in New York and you have friends that are speaking Spanish natively at home, then it's not that it's so familiar. It's so familiar. And the languages are very, very, very close. So it wasn't that hard. But that's because also I was spending 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day in listening to natives speaking Spanish. Now, at that time, I thought, if you go to another country and you speak, that's how you get good at the language. It's no, that's not how it works. But that's what I thought. And that's what most people probably still think. But I thought that, and anyway, in like the 3 months time, I was just always like 8 hours a day with real native Spanish speakers listening to them speak. Now, I thought I was getting good because I was speaking. That's not the case. It's because I was forced to listen and hear, right, all the time. But I did that for like 3 months, and then I kind of well, and then when I went back to New York, started school back up, and I was just like, not really interested in learning Spanish anymore. Kind of boring. Like like I didn't have that motivation. I was like, okay, like I don't really want to do this anymore. Yeah. But I was still interested in like looking cool. Like I was like, oh, Spanish, everyone learns Spanish. I think one girl said this to me. She was a girl that was in one of my Spanish classes in college, and she was talking about whatever she had said. She said something like, "Yeah, like everyone speaks Spanish, but," and she was like talking like casually. I was like, "Oh, true. Like speaking Spanish isn't even cool. Everyone speaks Spanish." And so I was like, "Yeah, Spanish is stupid." And so basically, I just like naturally was not that interested like in Spanish anymore. I had learned it a little bit. I was like decent, whatever, like okay, but I didn't care really. I wasn't I just had no real intrinsic motivation, but I still wanted to try other languages. And so like that summer, this was 2015 in the summer, I was like, oh, maybe I'll try a bunch of other languages just to see what they're like, just to see kind of how it feels. Spanish, yeah, I tried it. Let's try French. Let's try Portuguese. Let's try Arabic. Let's try Korean. Let's try Chinese. Let's try Japanese. Let's try Thai. Let's try all these languages. So I had a little notebook and I just memorized like very, very, very like basic phrases like, hi, how are you? Do you speak X language? Like, hi, how are you? Do you speak Thai? Hi, how are you? Do you speak Korean? Hi, how are you? Do you speak French? I had like a little notebook and I tried this. And since I was working in this city in Manhattan, excuse me, since I was working allergies, I'm starting to get allergies. The weather's getting nice, but I'm getting a lot of pollen in my lungs. Um, I noticed that I'm sorry, what was it? I was saying basically I was in the city. I was working in the city at that time. So there in New York City, there is people from every single country, all over. Everyone speaks all the languages. Oh, sorry, one second. I have like something in my eye. And it really hurts. It doesn't hurt. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay. I think that's better. Anyway, I was working in this city in Manhattan. And so I was like, oh, I'll just go around to people, accost them on the streets, basically. And I was like, oh, you look like you speak French. Or I'll like listen to, oh, I think they're speaking French. And I would like try like, bonjour. And I would like try to speak French. Same thing with Korean, same thing with Japanese. I would just, go around and everyone was like very nice, right? Like if you try to speak someone else's language and you're clearly not good at it, especially not in the native country, like in New York, people are like, "Oh wow, you're trying to speak my language. That's nice." Of course, you might mistake one person to speak a language as a native of some language and they're not, but like whatever. No, it's not really a big deal. But I would do this, and when I would do Korean, I'd be like, "안녕하세요, 한국말 줄 알아세요?" But like I would do this, right? But out of all the people that I interacted with, Korean people just were so welcoming and supportive and like, wow, you should really learn Korean. You should really continue. You're so good. You speak Korean so well. You guys know how Koreans are, right? You say one word and they go crazy. They love it, right? And a lot of other cultures, I guess, or people or countries, natives were like that too. But I just felt that Koreans were like, they just hyped me up. They got me so hyped. And I didn't even like think that like I thought I was good because Koreans would tell me I'm good. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm good at Korean. They keep saying I'm so good. Like I would say 안녕하세요. They're like, wow, they go crazy. And then, that was like very motivating because I was just trying it out. And then and so that's how I like actually started learning Korean. This is 2015 in like August, right? Like August. And then like the school semester starts in September. And so like September, October, like whatever, I was like kind of dabbling with Korean. So just like, I kind of want to master this. It's like 2015 in August, trying a bunch of languages, and Koreans just really hyped me up. And they're like, yo, you're so good. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to master this language. Like that was kind of how I ended up starting Korean, right? And then when the school semester started, like I said, all my friends are doing like cool stuff and I'm just kind of like chilling, like not doing much. But I was like, okay, no, I want to master Korean. I really want to get good at it. And there was still and there's still like whatchamacallit, like that, like I just want to look cool or something, like, oh, John can speak Korean, so cool. Like this was like a big part of it just cuz I wasn't doing anything. I was kind of just chilling. But anyway, so like it's September, October, like I was like, no, I want to master this now. And so for like, just like anybody else, just like anyone starting a foreign language, I thought at that point, right, I had went to Ecuador a couple months earlier. I got back in summer, and then 2015 September, school started. It's like my 3.5 year of college. And I thought like anyone else, I'm like, yeah, you got to speak a lot. You have to speak a lot. That's how you get good at a language, right? Okay. So like for like the next 4 or 5 months, right, to like early 2016, for like 4 or 5 months, I would just do speaking practice all day long, right? Or not all day long, like 30 minutes a day, maybe 4 days out of the week, something like that. And I thought, like, yeah, if you do a lot of speaking practice, you'll get so good. That's how it speak from day one. You got to speak. You got to speak. And I thought this, right? Because I didn't care. Like, I wasn't like, oh, what's the best way to learn a language? I'm just like I'm sure I looked up those videos, right? I looked up those videos and I was like, how do you learn a language? Boom. It's like, speak. I was like, okay, I'm going to speak. You find websites. Like I use the italki.com or italki, and just like, what is it called? No, sorry. Let me explain this a little bit. So for like 4 or 5 months, I was like, hey, I need to speak all the time, right? So back then, this is 8 years and 8 months ago, I thought, let's just round it. Let's just call it 9 years. Okay, let's just say 9 years. So it was 9 years ago, and there was like these old websites like mylanguageexchange.com, and you would go on to like these forums and be like, hi, I'm trying to learn Korean. Is there anyone out there that's trying to learn English? Let's do a language exchange. And so through that, I actually found like my first, and to this day, still Korean friend. She's like the nicest person in the world. But we found each other on this like really old website, My Language Exchange. It's so old. It's crazy like how much language exchange apps and websites have like become. It's crazy the progress there's been. But like, yeah, it was like this old school stuff. And so, we would like set up days to like, oh, we'll speak 30 minutes in English on this day, 30 minutes in Korean on that day. Or on the same day, we'll do 30 minutes English, 30 minutes Korean. And I would just basically copy and paste the same introduction to like every single person on that site, right? So I'd be like, hey, I'm John. I'm learning Korean. I really want to do speaking practice. We'll do 30 minutes English, 30 minutes Korean. So like for like 4 or 5 months, whenever it was possible, I was attending school. I was going to classes, but I was, as much as possible, trying to speak for like 4 or 5 months. So I was using all these sites. I was using that old school website. I was using like the italki, where you can like get teachers to talk to you, yada, yada, yada. And I was doing that for like 4 or 5 months, speaking practice basically. And yes, I was listening. I was trying stuff, right? I was like listening to like podcasts about Korean grammar. I was listening to like Korean culture podcasts, but like in English. I was listening to like, Korean phrases, best Korean. I was doing all that stuff, all the normal stuff that everyone tries to do, right? And because of the sheer hours that I put in, I was able to speak a little bit. But here's the thing. Like, I realized at like the 5th month mark that I was really good at my self-introduction, and that's about it. I could introduce myself really well. and people be like, "Wow, you're so good," blah, blah, blah. And like the first 5 minutes of every conversation, I would, I would, oh, I'm John. I'm from New York. I've been learning Korean for 2 months. I've been learning Korean for 3 months. Blah, 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 blah. And I went to Ecuador recently. My self introduction was great, but that's all was good. Anytime the other person would talk, I'd be like, what? 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 Like not understanding nothing. Not understanding nothing, right? And one thing to make a point here about language learning, if you're speaking with a native, right, that time can be very, very effective. If I'm speaking with a native, like let's say today, right, I'm learning Japanese right now. If I'm speaking with a native, I shouldn't be focused on speaking. I should be focused on what they're saying. So it's like, oh, 30 minutes speaking? No. 30 minutes listening, right? 30 minutes watching and listening. So if you're interested in, if you're the type of person who, yeah, you need people around you, you want to communicate with the world, totally get that. Have as many conversations as you want, but don't make it about what you want to say. It's like, wow, what I have to say is so interesting. No. Be curious about that person, and that's where you're going to learn a lot of language directly, right? Language learning is very, I guess you could say in a way, very indirect. Someone says something, you understand it, and then later that like it festers in your brain and it becomes part of your understanding of how the language works. Now you're not like doing this yourself. Your brain's doing the work. But if you're interested in the person, you'll pay attention, and that's what happens. So I was doing, 4 or 5 months of like speaking with people every day. Not every day, like 4 times out of the week, maybe 3 to 4, 5. It really depended on the week, I guess. But I would do 30 minutes English, 30 minutes Korean. Two things I realized. One, I was wasting so much time. I want to say one more thing about language learning here. The 30 minutes of speaking Korean, right? Let's say I spoke for like 20 minutes and the other person spoke for like 10 minutes, right? That 10 minutes is very valuable time. I'm looking at a native on a screen. They're speaking. I could see their lips moving where it's about them. They're talking and I'm paying attention. That 10 minutes of watching and listening is very valuable. So during the 4 and 5 months, me speaking a lot, unfortunately, I tried to speak too much. I should have, if I was every day now, if I had to be with a native in a real conversation, then what I would do is just like, I'm going to use Korean here, 경청, right? I'm just going to like be curious about them, what they're saying. It's not important for me to speak. Conversations, not important for me to speak, right? In terms of language acquisition. Let me just understand what they're saying, right? That's what I should have done. But even though I was doing 30 minutes for like 4 days out of the week for like 4 or 5 months, mostly me speaking, unfortunately, but there is value in that. There was the value in that I was able to get real natural Korean because when they would speak, I would be forced to pay attention, right? I would have to pay attention. So I would speak with my one friend a lot. We would do a lot of language exchange and I would just like meet random people all the time. But I was just doing my self-introduction. Hi, I'm John. Blah, 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 blah. Hi, I'm John. The next day. Hi, I'm John. Next day. I'm from New York. Next day. Hi. Same. Boring conversations. And I didn't know what they were saying because they'd be like, oh, I major in. And I'm like, what? I felt very stagnated because I can only do my self-introduction. And it's like, I've been doing this for like 5 months. What the hell? Like what gives, And I realized 2 things. First thing, I was like, if I could spend an hour on conversations for like 4 or 5 months, right? Well, 30 minutes would go to Korean, 30 minutes would go to English. I'm wasting 30 minutes on English for me, right? I'm a native English speaker. I don't need to be speaking 30 minutes a day. I could be doing that on Korean. I could be spending that time on Korean, right? So I was like, oh, first of all, I'm wasting time. By doing language exchange in this way, half of the time I'm dedicating my energy is going to English, and it's wasting my time. That's just the way it is. Yes, sir, I made certain friendships. That's very valuable. That's separate. But for the majority of the time, it was like, I have to speak English just to speak Korean. That's a waste of time. And then the second thing was like, all I'm doing is saying the same exact conversation over and over and over, and it's just my self introduction. That's boring. It's not valuable. It's not like what, like this is dumb. And then I saw, and so this is about the 5th month mark, right, of me learning Korean. It's like early 2016. And then, and I had not just conversations. Like I was like I said, I was trying to listen to like podcasts at that time, that first like 4 or 5 months. I was also listening to like Talk to Me in Korean podcast, which is like a very unnatural, very babyish. At that time, they had this thing called like fun stories in Korean, and it's basically you have like 2 Koreans or 3 Koreans talking to each other in Korean, and it's supposed to be natural, but it's not, because the thing is, like, if you give a piece of content to a native and say, hey, would you be interested in this? If they'd be interested in this, if like there is a type of person, whether they're a 2nd grader, 3rd grader, 4th grader, 5th grader, adult, if there is a native who would actually be like interested in the content, then that's good content, right? That's good content. The important thing is that when you're listening or watching content, is it like natural, right? Is it natural? And if a native would watch it, would listen to it, then it's good content, right? But that at that time, like Talk to Me in Korean, I think they've like updated their stuff a little bit, they made it a little better. But it was like very like, what is it like? Like even if you gave it to like a 1st grader, they would not be interested. It was so boring. But at that time, like content wasn't the way it is now. It wasn't that as accessible. You guys are lucky. There's a lot of good accessible content now. But like even in Korean now, there's so much good content. It's crazy. Just like native content that it's easy to find. Back then, it really wasn't. I think. I don't know. This is 9 years ago. Anyway, so like during that time, I was like trying stuff out 4 or 5 months, speaking, listening here, listening there, trying to study grammar, trying to learn words, the same way that everybody learns language. Boo. A boo. And okay, this is old. You guys wouldn't know this. This is like really old slang. Me and my friends in high school, whenever something would happen that we didn't like, we would just say "aboo," and guarantee you, the only person who would know "aboo" is like another native New Yorker that's maybe like my age, right? That's like born like around 92, 93, 94, maybe. I doubt most people are gonna know what "aboo" is, but that's something me and my friends still do. It's just like a very like, it's slang, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I was doing everything for the first 5 months. I was doing everything that most people try to do when they learn a foreign language, and although there were some nice things about it, it wasn't really effective. Then so this is like the 5th month, right? 2016, early 2016. I saw a video on the internet by Steve Kaufman. He is a guy on YouTube who learns many languages and talks about language learning all the time. He basically says the same thing that that I say on my channel, and that people who understand how language learning works to say, and it's that input is king. And back then, I had been doing this for like 5 months, like speaking practice, and then I was like, yeah, this is not working, right? How do I get better faster? I want to get better faster. I have time. Let's do it. And I saw his video, and his video said, input is king. Input is everything. And he explained that like the only way you really learn a language, like how you're going to get good at a language fast or effectively, is if you're just constantly exposed to it, constantly, all the time. You don't get good at speaking by speaking, he said, right? Now, this was new to me at the time. I was like, what does that mean? And it's like, if you don't know any Arabic, right? Do you know any Arabic? Try some Arabic. If you don't know any Arabic, and I said to you today, okay, practice, speak a lot. Are you going to get good at Arabic? No. That makes no sense. But if I said, here, listen to some Arabic, right? And you start to listen to it, then you would actually have some Arabic to actually speak out, to put into words. But it's coming from input, right? The only way you can actually start saying something in a language is if you've heard it first, right? That's the only way. technically. Because you can read old text and kind of assume what things might sound like. But if you're talking about accurately, the only way to accurately make language speak is if you've heard it before. That's the only way. I was like, oh yeah. The only way you could say something is if you've heard it. So it's got to be in your head. He said, because of this, input is king. If you can't say something, if you can't put words together, it's because you haven't heard enough things. You haven't heard enough ways language is put together. This was like a revelation. I was like, wow. Wait a minute. Wait. Everything I know in English is because I've heard it before. Like right? So like obviously there's more that goes into this, and that like you can say sentences you've never heard before because that's what language ability is. You could put together things that you've never heard before. But the point is that all comes from having input in your brain, in your head, right? It all comes from input. All language ability originally comes from input. And so when he said input is king, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And he is someone, Steve Kaufman is someone who really, really, really says like, reading is everything, reading is everything. Quickly, I'll just say the issue with that is that no, you shouldn't read until you're actually good at the language. It doesn't make sense, right? Imagine you told a baby who knew nothing, here, start reading. No, it makes no sense. You have to have good input first, auditory input first, visual, oh man, I always forget this word, visual audio input. Visual and auditory input first, and then through that you get most of the language. You get mostly all you need. And then when you're at like a first grade level, which is like really high level, especially if you go from 0 to a first grade language ability, like that's really good, right? Then you start reading, and then yes, reading becomes everything. So if you're someone who's at an intermediate level, as in if you're at a reading level, like if you're at a reading level, right, you can mostly understand what like natives are saying, like, your average daily podcast, you can understand it, something that you're interested in. I'm not talking about like very difficult content. I'm not talking about difficult stuff. But if you can watch like stuff that's made for first graders, stuff that's targeted for first graders, and you can understand like 80% of that, 90% of that, like without like a huge issue, then you're at a reading level, right? And then you can start reading. Watch his channel. Steve Kaufman's got a great channel because he just emphasizes reading in such a way that is so easy to understand. He's very compelling, right? He's got good, I can't think of the word, 설득력, but not until you're at a reading level. But what he said though, was input is king. And he explained that he just listens to like the language he's trying to learn all the time. He's like, I just listen to the language I learn all the time. Listen to the language I learn all the time. I was like, oh my God, that's so smart. What am I doing? I know I've been trying to do that with like the Talk to Me in Korean podcast, but why have I not been doing that like that, like music, listening to it like music? So at that point, this is like the 5th month mark, right? I was like, oh man, yeah, I gotta just listen to Korean all the time. Boom. So I opened up my podcast app basically, and I would just start searching for things I thought would be interesting. And from then I actually found one of my favorite podcasts of all time. Shout out to Tak PDA, 여행 수다 is the name of the podcast. And it's a podcast all about travel. And so I started listening to that. I would just, I would like translate words, like for example, food. And then I would have that translated into Korean, and I would just type that into the podcast app, and then I would just find episodes and like download them and just freaking go all day long. So like the 5th month mark, I realized input was king. I was like, boom, I need to listen all the time. Now, caveat here. At that point in time, I didn't realize there was a difference between listening and watching. Second caveat, there's no good word for 시청 in English, right? Because watching implies eyes, but it doesn't imply definitely also listening. 시청 implies watching and listening. I wish there was a good word for this in English, but I'm trying to say that I didn't know at the time there's a difference between listening and watching with audio. And so I did mostly listening. I still had not found the beauty in watching. I'll get to that. But yeah, so at the 5th month mark, I was like, man, I gotta listen a lot. Okay. So boom, all day, all day, all day. I would go to class. And I would just have my AirPods in. But at that time they didn't have AirPods. I just had like the wired through my shirt and like in my hoodie. And I just listen. Now, I did that for the next year, like all year long. In my college apartment, right? There's like dorms and then there's like on-campus apartments. I was in my own room actually at that point. And so before that summer, before I started learning Korean, I was with my other friends, and that's why I took a semester off. But then when I came back, I moved into a new apartment on campus, and I had my own room. So inside my apartment, it's like me and two other roommates, but we each have our own room. So in my room, I had like a TV, and I just always had on Korean news, live streaming 24/7. I think it was YTN News Live, or it might have been KBS Live. I like switch between, but I just had that TV on like all the freaking time, just always. And so at one point, it would become distracting, and I turned the TV backwards just for the audio, right? Like I was never someone who's good at technology. I'm sure there was a better way. I should have just bought like a Bluetooth speaker or whatever. But I had my TV on all the time. So every time I was in my apartment room, I would have Korean on. Every time I go to class, I'd be listening to podcasts, right? This is the 5th month and then forward, that next year. So I learned, speaking practice for like 5 months. And then the next year, so a total year and a half, the next year, just podcasts all the time and listening all the time. That was the majority of what I did. Like I was probably putting in like 4 hours a day at least of listening to Korean for a year long. Like what's the math there? Like if I did, right, 4 hours times, let's just call it 365. Yeah, it's like 1,400 hours of Korean listening in like 1 year. And during that time, I would still, like maybe once a week, go on Hello Talk or go on, I don't know, like My Language Exchange and do conversations like sometimes. But at that point, because I realized that, yeah, input is everything, I would just try to get the native speakers to like speak as much as possible, right? Like I didn't care to like, I was like, oh, they would ask me questions and I'd be like very short answers and be like, what about you? Explain to me your whole day. More listening. So I would still do like conversations for that next year, but I wasn't like the first 5 months I was like, let's do speaking practice. And then I was, yeah, it's so dumb. That's so dumb. What a waste of time. Why do I think what I have to say is so important when I can't even string a sentence together, right? Like, let me just have natives tell me about their day. Let me see if I can make friendships. And so that basically, let me get adjusted on this chair a little better. That next year was just like the majority of the day was podcast. Now, throughout that next year, I still was trying to look up words, trying to understand grammar. I was still using a translator for new words. Like I was still trying to do like memorization, trying all this, trying Anki. Anki was always a try, fail, because it's an annoying tool, not really intuitive. But I throughout that first year and a half, right, the first 5 months speaking, and then the next year listening like a crazy person, I was always still trying to like memorize words, still trying to like look up grammar, understand grammar, blah, 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 like, but it was never effective because I was at a really low level, so studying grammar does nothing when you're at a low level. Translating only gets in the way. Now I know this. But that part of it was like, let's say that makes up like 20% of the time. 70% of the time was podcasts. 70% podcast. And then like speaking at that point for the next year was like 10%. I would do like Hello Talk like every once a week, or my friend that I told you about, like we'd go on a conversation, catch up. But it was no longer, it was like really immersive in, I'm sorry. What is that? What we got going on here? ads. I hate phone ads. But yeah, it was like 70% listening, and then like maybe 20% like trying to study, and then trying to study, never successful at that point. And then like 10%, conversations with like friends and or new people, right? And you can look at the conversations with new people. Maybe that's like 5% listening, 5% speaking. But that's how like my first year and a half of Korean went. So to catch you up again, ready? 2015 August until, let's say, August, September, October, November, December. Yeah, that's about right, to January. So 2015 August for like 5 months speaking practice. Then 2016 to 2017 February, just like oh my God, I'm sorry. Podcast madman, just always listening to podcasts, not watching, just listening. And then here and there, have conversations. Here and there, have conversations. Conversations are great. Have conversations. If you really care about the person, if you're interested in the person, don't have a conversation just to because you think what you have to say is important and because you're trying to speak. No. If you're genuinely interested in someone and they have the same hobbies like basketball, hip hop, these things I like, we could have a fun conversation, and I'm interested in to hear what you have to say. That's the important thing. Don't try to speak. Not important. But that's what I did for the first year and a half. Okay. Now, fast forward, 2017 February. It's been a year and a half since I started learning Korean, and that like the past year was like really, really good, heavy content all the time. So like I said 4 hours a day of listening, but like remember, in my apartment, in my room, my TV was just always on, like always, all the time. And so I'm always listening to like Korean, like all the time, nonstop, whenever I'm at home at least. And then in 2017 February to 2018 February, that next year, I was in Korea. I was teaching English, and what I did was the exact same thing. I continued to listen to podcasts all the time, just like all the freaking time, every single time, all the time. So like, even though I was in Korea, I was just always have my headphones in, listening. Speaking again, maybe like 10% of the time. And again, still trying to study, trying to use Anki, trying to memorize words, trying to understand grammar, never really having a long period of time where I like stuck with one study method. But it wasn't like, it never felt really too effective. But yeah, that next year in Korea, just pretty much the same thing. Hours and hours of podcasts. At that point, I started listening to Kortusho a lot, and I would listen to like stuff that I was more interested than takpidi의 여행수다. I kind of like, okay, now I'm in Korea, let me like listen to other stuff. So I was always just listening to stuff, right? And I want to make sure that I get the timing right here. Yeah. I went to language exchanges, actually. When I was in Korea, I went to a lot of language exchanges. Language exchanges are fun because you can make friends. Now, here's how I do a language exchange. Selfish. Got to be selfish. I don't care if people don't like this. I think it's a good strategy. When I went to language exchanges, I noticed most people there don't really even speak Korean. So like let's just say, for example, it's like 50% Americans, just for example, 50% Koreans, right? Almost everybody will just speak English, right? Almost everybody's just gonna end up speaking English because most people don't speak Korean, right? Like there's a lot of Koreans who speak a decent amount of English, but not the reverse. Even if you're in Korea, most Americans just don't really speak, or foreigners don't really speak Korean. So when you go to a language exchange, everyone ends up speaking English. But that first year that I was in Korea, 2017 to 2018, February to February, I was frequenting, I would go to language exchanges in Seoul. And I didn't live in Seoul, but I would go there like, every other weekend or whatever. And you can make friends there. That's the best part. So I would go there to make Korean friends. And the funny part is like, I'm selfish when it comes to like my language learning experience. I don't think you always have to be selfish, but sometimes it pays. And I would go to a language exchange, and because everyone's always speaking English, right? It's like that. I don't want to speak English. I don't want to waste my time, right? Now, I want to make friendships, but like I would like to make friendships with the person who actually doesn't really care to get good in English, but just kind of wants like foreigner friends, right? The cultural experience, because there's a lot of people who will go to a language exchange, and some of them want to get good at English, but some of them just want to kind of like meet foreign friends. Some of them are just kind of so like I would just only speak in Korean. Now, every language exchange is different, but I would just, and if you don't have time right now, save this next video to your watch later playlist. So when you do have time, grab a cup of coffee and give it a watch. That action alone helps the I Speak Korean Pretty Well podcast quite a lot. Thank you.